It was the late 18th century when William Carey left Britain and went to India as a missionary. And it began the modern missions period in Protestantism. William Carey became known as the father of modern missions. In that following century, the 19th century, many other missionaries followed in his footsteps. Adoniram and Ann Judson went to Burma. Mary Slessor went to modern-day Nigeria. Hudson Taylor to China. Hundreds, thousands of missionaries went around the world in the 19th century, primarily from Europe and America. This led to a monumental event in 1910, the World Missionary Conference in Edinburgh, Scotland. Significant event in church history where missionaries and church leaders from various Protestant denominations gathered there for a conference of almost 2 weeks long, talking about what had been done over the past century and how the gospel had been spread to various continents. What's interesting is even at this point, after the great century of Protestant missions, 82% of the world's Christians lived in Europe or North America. 18% of the world's Christians were in the global South. Now fast forward a century to 2010. The global North, consisting primarily of Europe and the United States, had 39% of the world's Christians. 61% of the world's Christians now live in the global South. That is a huge shift in just one century. And those that study these numbers are projecting that by 2050, 72% of the world's Christians will be in the global South. This map shows where the 2.4 billion Christians are located throughout the world. You can see here each country, and the bigger the circle, the more Christians live there. And it's interesting because you see that still in the United States, it's the biggest circle. And there are other significant Christian populations in places in Europe and Russia. But also look at other countries that have large Christian populations. Nations such as Brazil, the Philippines, Nigeria, Mexico, China. And there are also smaller countries where they now have over 90% of their population that are Christian all across the global South, such as Papua New Guinea, Burundi, Peru. And now look at Sub-Saharan Africa, where you see large populations of Christians throughout that region. In fact, Sub-Saharan Africa is a great place to look when you want to note how this shift in global Christianity has come about in the last century. In the year 1900, there were 10 million Christians in Sub-Saharan Africa. In the year 2000, 380 million. And some project by the year 2050, around 1 billion Christians. More Christians will be in Sub-Saharan Africa than any other region in the world. Christianity has indeed gone south. And this is exciting because it means that Christianity is truly a global religion dispersed through countries around the world. Another way to show this shift is in 1910, 80% of the world's Christians were white. In the year 2010, 60% are non-white. You know, one of the ways to look at it is even what's the most spoken language in the church? You might think English, but it's not. Spanish. More Christians speak Spanish than any other language. That comes from the growth in Latin America. As Stephen Bevins says, a Catholic missiologist, says by 2025, fully 2/3 of Christians will live in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The average Christian today is female, black, and lives in a Brazilian favela or an African village. It is important to note that while there is this shift to the global South into countries like Brazil and the Philippines, the United States is still the country with the most Christians. And so to say that America is a post-Christian nation isn't exactly true. But there is a shift happening for sure. What's also interesting is that between the United States, Brazil, and Mexico, 24% of the world's Christians in those three nations alone. Now, we also have to be aware that in places like Brazil and Mexico, the majority of those Christians are Catholics. And that's part of understanding global Christianity, is to realize that 50% of the world's Christians are Catholic. About 37% are Protestant, and 12% are Orthodox. Now, we'll say more about those different groups in a lesson in a few weeks. One other trend that I want to mention as we think about this shift in global Christianity to the global South is how the gospel is being spread and where missionaries come from. You know, it's true that the majority of missionaries sent out from churches and sending organizations come from the United States and Europe. And so if you look at the top 10 countries that send out missionaries to a foreign field, the top ones are the United States, France, the UK, South Korea. But that's beginning to shift, and missionaries are being sent out from other countries. But if you talk about both missionaries and Christians who have gone to another country because of immigration or seeking asylum or work, and you think about the Christians who have left their home country, gone to a foreign land, and are living out the gospel where they're at, well, then some other countries surface to the top. And so you have countries like Brazil, who actually sends out the second most missionaries in the world. But you have other countries like the Philippines and Nigeria who are sending out people and taking the gospel to foreign lands. And in fact, the reason Europe still has as many Christians as it does, currently about equal with Africa, is because so many African Christians have moved to Europe. And now the largest churches in Europe actually consist of Africans living there now. And so the gospel is being spread throughout the world, but is being spread from lots of different places to lots of different places. This really is a different time in the world. This shift in global Christianity to the global South can't be emphasized enough. It really is shaping the world in such significant ways and shaping our own faith. In fact, it is this shift in global Christianity that helped give shape to our Restore the World vision. As our team prayed and reflected and researched the best way we want to engage in what God is doing around the world, we looked a lot at different trends in global Christianity. And we noted how God is moving in the global South in significant ways, and churches are growing and faith is vibrant, and other countries are sending out missionaries. And not just sending it to lands far away, but actually sending missionaries to the United States. This really is a different world. And we wanted the Restore the World vision to reflect these changes. One way you see that is in the first initiative in the Restore the World vision. That initiative is titled Restoring the World by Welcoming the Homeless in Brazil. Now, as most of you know, Highland has a long history with missions in Brazil, and in particular, a long history with supporting Antonio and Phyllis Gonçalves in E2 Brazil. And as we thought about how to move forward into the next 20 years of Highland's global ministries, we wanted to think about what does it look like to engage in missions in E2 Brazil in light of the changing face of global Christianity. And so at the heart of this initiative is trying to get Highland to become equal mutual partners with the E2 Church. That this is no longer about being the sending church or the church that funds and gets to make decisions for a church on the field. No, we really want to take serious this idea of partnership. And we want to think about how can the E2 Church help us grow in our faith and in our ministries, and how can we help them? How together can we help spread the gospel in Texas and in Brazil and throughout the world? We have a lot to learn from them, especially since we have common visions for how to serve our neighbors. And so the E2 Church, for years now, has been ministering alongside their homeless friends. They have great experiences and expertise that we can learn from as we move deeper into our Restore Abilene Homeless Initiative. This is why we invited Mark and Allie Kaiser in November to come share with us, because we have a lot to learn from them. This is why the group from E2 came for Restoration Week. It's easier for us to think about sending short-term trips there to Brazil because we have something to offer. But in light of this shift in global Christianity, it makes a lot of sense for them to come here, for us to see what it looks like to have a vibrant faith in Jesus Christ in their context and how we might grow. This is where we want to go with this initiative. We want to live out this reality that God is moving throughout the world, that we are not the center of the Christian faith, that God has always been a God of the whole world. And now we see it very clearly as He moves in places like Brazil, places like Kenya, places like India, Indonesia. God is moving in those places. And we want to join Him in what He's doing through His people throughout the world. And so, as we wrap up this lesson, I want us to think about how we understand ourselves in light of this shift in global Christianity. Christina Cleveland writes this: "The primary problem is that our identities are too small. We tend to rely most on our smaller cultural identities and ignore our larger common identity as members of the body of Christ." This is the challenge. Do we see ourselves primarily as these smaller cultural identities? Are we Protestant? Are we American? No, in the world today, we have to see ourselves as brothers and sisters with our family across this world and be a part of what God is doing in their lives and in ours, and grow in our partnership in the gospel as fellow disciples of Jesus Christ.